Good morning. Stan Stahl with SecureTheVillage here. Welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to be talking about lessons learned from cyber investigations. And as you can see, it's like the old joke about, where do you put the right restaurant? What's the most important thing? Location, location, location. How do you want to get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. What's the lesson from cyber investigations? Visibility, visibility, visibility. So we're going to be talking about that with our guest, Joe Greenfield. Get started on that just a few moments. But before I do, I want to remind you of a couple of things. One, it's the annual Cybersecure Southern California 2019 conference that SecureTheVillage and Pepperdine Grazio Dio are doing jointly. This year's conference is cybersecurity as a team sport. Building a winning cybersecurity team. Our keynote speaker is Ron Ross, fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And what makes this conference different from everything else you're going to go see is this great quote of Confucius: I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Part of what we will be doing at this conference with Pepperdine, and it's great because we've got educators, trained people who know how to put programs together like this. We've got active learning exercises throughout the day. So please join us at that. Mark it on your calendars, go to the SecureTheVillage website, and you can get more information and also register. Also want to remind everybody that this is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and all of us stay safe online, powered by the National Cybersecurity Alliance. And their theme this year is Own It, Secure It, and Protect It. Again, it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Let's everybody, as the hashtag says, let's be cyber smart. With that, let me introduce our guest for this program, Joe Greenfield. Joe's the Managing Director and Chief Forensic Examiner for Maryman and Associates. You may recall you've seen Brad Maryman, who is the Maryman of Maryman and Associates, on our show a couple of times. And Joe is also the Associate Professor of Practice in Forensics and Cyber Investigations at the USC Viterbi School of Engineering. Joe, thank you so much for being on our show this month.
Thank you, Stan. It's an honor to be on.
Sure. Give us a little background on you, what you're all about, what you've been doing.
Sure. So, I started at USC back in the dark ages as a student. I did my undergraduate, my master's there. I started doing some professional development courses, partnering with Brad in the early stages, and then I got the opportunity to teach one or two classes at USC. Then I kind of got the teaching bug, started teaching full time, and then built up the program over the years. So now I'm pretty proud to say that USC has one of the most comprehensive undergraduate cybersecurity programs in the country, with 2 undergraduate minors, and one in cybersecurity, one in forensics, and then an interdisciplinary degree between global intelligence and international relations, as well as cybersecurity operations. So we have about 150 students in the program at this point across the different disciplines.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And we look at the big challenge we face, not just cybersecurity today, but cybersecurity tomorrow as well. And our workforce is far smaller than what we know we need. There are 5-figure openings here in the Southern California area alone. What you're doing is just it's such a necessary thing for the community. So something USC and you should be proud of. In its own way, USC has had its share of bad news recently, and you're a breath of fresh air with what you guys are doing there. So let's just congratulations for all that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Oh, for sure, absolutely, Joe. To put today's webinar in context, we had an earlier webinar. This goes back to November of 2018. 11 months ago. Brad was a part of that, and that's available online. It's in the resources section of the resource kit, Getting Cyber Prepared. And we looked at things like, what are the objectives of cyber preparation, how incident response and business continuity touches the NIST framework, and we'll touch on this again today. Who are the members of the incident response team, and the 5 basic incident response and business continuity phases of planning, preparation, detecting, reporting, assessing, deciding, respond and recover, and then most important, of course, lessons learned. So today what we're going to be talking about is kind of taking that up to the next level, talking about the critical importance of network visibility in response to a cyber incident. We'll be talking about first visibility. What are we talking about? We'll look at some various case studies, called them the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we'll talk about getting visible. And most importantly as well, don't wait till the incident to discover, are you really visible, but test it going in. So Joe, why don't you kick us off on this chart? Talk to us about what visibility is. What are you talking about when you use that phrase?
Sure thing. So when we talk with a lot of organizations about, kind of their cybersecurity posture, I mean, everyone right now is a really good idea about, policy and hardening systems and things like that. But when I talk to them about, okay, so how much visibility do you have on your network? I kind of get a glassy-eyed look in their eyes, and they're not quite sure what I'm talking about. What I'm really talking about is, at the most basic level are the logs that are available at any given time and what they tell you and what it's really describing. But it goes even more in depth than that. What is being audited on your systems? Where is it being audited? Where is this information being stored? And as well as what information are you getting in from the outside world in order to help see what is going on within your network, your hosts, your mobile devices, everything. Because what ends up happening is when an incident actually occurs and you go to look for all this information in order to make the determination of what is going on, oftentimes we find that organizations don't have anything available for us to look at. And if you don't have the logs if you don't have the visibility from when the incident occurred in the past, it's going to make investigating a lot more difficult. And it's going to take more time and more resources, as opposed to if you had everything set up and you know what you can see on your systems, on your network, then you can say, right here, go at it.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the old mysteries I used to read in my childhood, locked room murders, for example, where the victim is in a room, it's locked, there are no doors, there are no windows, and of course you got to figure it out, and there's a dearth of clues, and you contrast that with walking into, let's say, a murder scene where you've got the knife, you've got the victim, you've got glasses and other things holding fingerprints, et cetera, and good God, now you've got a wealth of information with which to work. Yeah.
I mean, you and I both know that we're living in a world where it's not really a matter of if you get breached, it's when. And every Fortune 500 company's been hit. Every organization is targeted, and so having this mentality, this older mentality of, well, we just need to keep everyone out. That's just not going to work anymore. And really, it's how much can we see from not just bad behavior, but normal behavior. Because if you know what normal behavior looks like, you can model that.
Yeah. Well, and I would think here as well, just looking up the slides as we've kind of laid it out, all the intrusion detection prevention systems that you've got, if you've got machine learning, tools like Darktrace, for example, that are watching the whole network, that not only gives you the opportunity to be able to quickly perhaps block an attack, so you're protecting the network, but it also gives you the ability to very, very quickly detect that attack going on.
Yeah, and not just being able to detect the attack going on, but even if it's not detected, you have the wealth of information, whether it's a Darktrace or a CrowdStrike appliance or whatever appliance you might have, or even if there's no appliances and you just turn on every logging mechanism available in whatever you've got.
Yeah,
it's always better to have more information than less, especially when when you get that call from a government agency saying you might want to take a look at what's going on.
Yes. I mean, you say that, and we had a situation, God, this goes back probably a couple of years, when we got a call from an IT vendor whose client in fact, had received that phone call from the government agency that said, you might want to take a look at one of your laptops. And of course, we called in Maryman and Associates, who else? And
Yeah,
I don't
thank
know
you.
if it was Brad or you or who it was that looked at that particular laptop that was,
Remember.
under attack. But in fact, because logging had been turned on the machine, you guys were able to come back and say to the client, yes, you've been breached. Yes, the actor, the software on the breach, had called home, but that was all it had done. There was no exfiltration of any information. So you saved that client a whole breach disclosure.
Yeah,
That,
and
yeah,
and a lot of times when we talk with people, they kind of have this ostrich mentality of, well, if I don't see it happening, then I don't have to disclose.
yes,
And
yeah,
well, I think I just saw an article I think it was in the New York Times about Krispy Kreme and how they failed to do a breach notification because even though they were informed of it, they just chose not to, which, makes me, really feel good about going to get a donut this morning.
yeah,
But but oftentimes visibility, just like you said, Stan, it gives us a window into not just what happened, but what was done. Because if we can identify exactly what was done by the malicious actors while they're in your network, we can limit the scope of the breach, which means it's less cost on the organization, less cost for protecting individuals, and being able to tell individuals whether or not they actually were breached as a part of this. There's a great example. We assisted with the investigation of a CPA firm, and luckily, because of some advanced monitoring of individual records within the accounting software, we knew exactly which tax returns were touched by the malicious actors and which weren't. So we're able to limit the scope. Instead of being the 50,000 individuals whose tax returns were managed by the CPA firm, we were able to limit it to around 350, which, I mean, that's a drastic change.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But again, if you don't have that level of visibility, if you don't have that granularity in what you're looking at and what's available to look at, you're never going to be able to get to that point. And instead, it's going to have to be that blanket, everybody was breached.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you're saying is, that there's that side of it, so that by having the visibility, you can make correct answers. You know what's going on. You can solve that challenge. I think as well, if you go back a couple of webinars ago, the subject where it was in the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act context, but the subject was, well, what are reasonable security standards, which is one of the things the CCPA requires. It's a get out of jail card free, so to speak, if there's a breach. And when we look at what's the minimum that an organization has to do to have, quote, reasonable practices, having all this logging and having all this evidence available should there be a breach, to me, and to what we've done on Secure the Village, that's part of reasonableness. If you're not doing this collection, if you don't have this kind of visibility into your network, you're not being reasonable at that point.
Yeah, well, I would agree.
Yeah, yep. So let's go on to the next slide.
Sure.
We talk about the NIST framework often on these webinars. It's become the de facto standard, it seems, at least in America, for cybersecurity. And not to overdo it, but it seems to me that one of the things absolutely worth discussing about is looking at visibility through the eyes of the NIST framework, and how, particularly as you look throughout identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, you're seeing opportunities. Where do you need to be visible? But you're also saying how visibility also supports protecting and detecting and responding and recovering, all of those things, as well as just what we do after the breach.
Yeah. And I completely agree. And it's unfortunately something that we still see. We still see a lot of organizations tend to ignore things like this. We still run into this problem of somebody buys, the newest, best whiz bang, firewall that's going to cost the organization $500,000. And I asked them a simple question like, well, do you guys have anything like aggregate network traffic over certain ports, like a Cisco NetFlow or something like that? And they look at me and they say, we don't have NetFlow. And I said,
Yeah.
okay, so if there is a breach and they're taking all of your data, you're not going to know where or what port it's going to or the dates and times or anything like that. They said no. Okay.
Yes.
So it's things like that where, you know, it's just looking at visibility as an idea, as a mantra within the organization, where look at where your data is, look at where it can go, and can you see if that actually happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if the answer is no, well, take another look and figure out how can you start seeing that. And I would really start from the data itself that you're trying to protect, because yes, you want to limit access, but how do you know if it's being accessed in a malicious way?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, but we can talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, the NIST framework is great. It's you know, we talked about this a little bit offline, but it's almost a compliance perspective where because it's here, because we have thorough documentation, if you're not doing it, well, you're going to get slapped on the wrist.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, and I look at this, of course. I mean, asset management. If you don't have visibility into your assets, how can you manage them? Uh, I'm just picking these kind of at random. Information protection process and procedures. You've got to have visibility into what those things are. You've got to know your maintenance stuff. Blah blah blah, and so on and so on. What are your detection processes? Those demand a certain amount of visibility. Response planning, and we'll get into this much more later, better take into account, well, what are we able to see? What do we know that we can't see? What might we want to now go start turning on so we can see, et cetera, et cetera. The same thing in of course, recovery planning and all. Even when it comes to communication, you want to be able to say accurately what's going on here. And the better you can see, the more likely you are to be able to know and to be able to say what's going on. So with that, let's give some, you know, case studies. And I purposely did not put them here. Just, you know, there's three situations. One, you don't see anything. We've been in that. We've both been in that situation. One where you may have some partial visibility that can help you, and the other where you've got nearly complete visibility into the situation.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the no visibility. This is what we just talked about, where you get the call from the 3 or 4 letter government agency. Hey, we saw some weird stuff going on, and your customer data is being sold. Or you get a call from one of the credit card companies saying, we're not going to process any more credit cards from your organization because you are the nexus of all the fraud. And you know, this is news out of the dark, and you had no idea this was happening. That to me is no visibility, because, you know, if you had some level of visibility, hopefully you had some sort of monitoring trigger when stuff like this occurs. Or on the flip side, where we have had to assist in instances like this, where we go in, you know, they get the call from the government agency, we go in, we see that there's malware dropped, we know when it started, and we can't say that certain people were not impacted by this. We just have to assume, because we found what the root cause was that caused, you know, the breach in the first place, and because we have no granularity to determine what was done by the malicious actors afterwards, at that point it's a call by legal counsel to see, well, you've already gotten people complaining about fraud. We found out what the cause of the fraud was. We can't really limit the scope after that. So it's really, you know, a question for legal disclosure. And, you know, generally what we've seen is there's completely, you just assume everybody's been hit and everybody's been breached, and there's no way to limit it. And so that's kind of that's the worst case. That's the no visibility.
Ask a question on that point. What percentage of the cases you investigate fall into this no visibility realm?
Too many.
Too many.
Still too many today. Yeah.
Oh, I think, well, I mean, at some level, one is too many, sadly.
Yeah.
But when you say that, I hear a number like maybe 30, 40%, maybe?
Yeah, it's probably closer to 40%.
40%. I mean, that's sad. Yeah. I mean,
it really is.
Yeah.
And what's worse is we have had a couple of times where we had some idea of what was going on, but based on the date that they get a call from I think this one was the one of the credit monitoring agencies called them. We go in and investigate, and they thought the breach happened like 4 weeks ago based on the data that was left, but the initial breach happened a year and a half ago.
Ouch. And they didn't
It's
know
like,
about it.
they had no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
And so
So for a
now
year and a
suddenly
half.
the scope is, yeah. And so now
Yeah.
suddenly the scope is expanded a lot more than they want it to be. But again, if they have visibility and they can act upon it, hopefully maybe they're able to detect, respond, and everything like that. But if there's no visibility, you have no ability to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we still have, and on that point of visibility, we don't see this very often anymore, but there are some people who are still have this mentality of, oh, the logs are going to generate too much data and we don't have anywhere to store it. You can buy a 16 terabyte hard drive on Amazon for like $500 these days.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of room to store logs. You get, cloud storage for pennies, and you really do have that ability. And so, like, one of the examples of visibility that I love is when organizations log invalid logins. And people say, oh, people mistype their passwords all the time, we can't store that. You actually can. And when you do, and when we see somebody has breached it, we can go back and see, oh, this IP address tried logging in 500 times before it finally gets the right password. Maybe this is something that should be visible and triggered.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But there's too many times that simple thing of, we don't log invalid logins. Why? You can store that.
Yeah. And per standard, I mean, the standards that our clients adopt all require that invalid logins to me is that's one of the no-brainers to log that, because
Exactly.
invalid
But we
login.
still see a lot of organizations that are very resistant to that.
Yeah. Yeah. What that raises just another question, kind of following the conversation along.
Sure.
What is it when you go back and you talk now to the executives, not IT, but the people up above IT, if you will, that what do you hear as why they weren't doing any logging?
A lot of it was just not, ignorance is the wrong word, but maybe just there wasn't enough attention to detail of the IT side of things from the implementation perspective. So maybe they thought something was done from a policy perspective, but from the implementation, it wasn't done. And so it was, again, that, the mantra is visibility. If they don't have visibility into the practices of IT and security operations, then you have no idea. But we can get into a little bit later on in how you actually test your visibility. But and we can talk about how does senior leadership actually see what is visible and what isn't.
Yeah. I mean, because that's one of the things that we'll talk about with our clients on a regular basis is, how do it's what, if you were on last month's webinar with Bob Zukas talking about boards and all, it's that tone at the top that we're talking about, that sets the tone for the entire organization.
Exactly.
Equifax being my poster child, for when it's not done appropriately. And it seems that, in part, the challenge is if there's not that tone in the top, then IT oftentimes doesn't understand by themselves the importance of doing this, so they may not. And correspondingly, they may, but they don't get the support from above. So they may understand it, but they don't get the support, so it doesn't happen.
And oftentimes that is the case that we see, is that we in cases where there's no visibility, oftentimes it was something that was requested by IT that was simply not funded or put on the back burner or put down the priority chain. And when we talk to them about things like that, they're like, yeah, that's like a Q4 next year project. And we're like, you might want to move that up a little bit. And they say, well, we would, but senior leadership wants us to do all this first. And we'll say, okay.
Exactly. And again, I think about the Target breach, where there was a ton of visibility. They had CrowdStrike, I believe, monitoring their system.
I don't remember off the top
No,
of
it
my
wasn't
head.
Crouch, it was the other,
No.
but whoever, they had,
Yeah.
really some great visibility, but they didn't have the
Yep.
resources to manage the visibility, to pay attention to it
That.
as well.
Yeah.
And that was,
And
again, a tone at the top.
yeah, and that's something that we've seen over and over again. Because a lot of times when I talk with people who aren't in the space, they think, oh, we're called in because IT didn't do their job, and that's about as far from the truth as it gets. Because I would say 99% of the time there's no negligence. It is IT simply either not having resources, or things weren't tested in the right way, or there are various different reasons. And so when we come in, we actually more often than not help IT gain more resources, more budget, more personnel, more attention in a positive way than just pointing fingers. I'd say less than 1% of the times we actually point fingers and saying, this was negligence.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the same thing we find. It's helping IT navigate this space so that we're getting
Exactly.
the visibility that we need. Give us an example where partial visibility, kind of, if you will, began to save the day.
So partial visibility, I'd say this is probably the next 50% where there's some partial visibility. Maybe they log valid logins, but they don't log invalid logins. Maybe they don't go back far enough. So maybe they'll only record 30 days worth and not 180 days, which is generally what we recommend, depending on the organization, depending on what their capabilities are. It's things like that. So, a great example of this is a breach we just worked on, where it was a leverage remote access tool from IT that led to the attack, and it was a PS Empire, PowerShell Empire attack that led to ransomware. And the thing that gave us that reason why I call this partial visibility is because there was particular signatures in the attack that, had there been heightened visibility within the organization, it could have stopped this particular attack. A simple example is having endpoint security monitor for base64 encoded PowerShell. I don't know of any organization that actually needs to run base64 encoded PowerShell scripts. Like, that to me is the biggest red flag. And this one was doubly base64 encoded PowerShell. So that's there's absolutely no reason for this. Now, this organization ran PowerShell, and we audited all the scripts. Nobody used base64 encoding. So we said this is a really easy way to prevent this type of attack in the future. But there were enough granular logs of the remote access tool being used that allowed us to see the exact scripts that were being run at the exact time by specific IP addresses, which was fantastic. The reason why I call this partial visibility is because we assisted the IT group. They were using a particular package that they didn't know about, more comprehensive logging that was tracked but not visible unless you enabled certain features. And when I discovered that, I got all the logs I needed.
So what was the outcome?
The outcome was we were able to posit. So this was ransomware. So some of the ransomware was dormant. We were able to positively ID all the systems that were hit with this particular form of ransomware. We were able to contain it. We were able to mitigate it. We were able to make the determination of exactly the behavior that was done of this particular script. And because it was very specific, the recommendation for legal was not to do a particular disclosure because it was ransomware only, not data theft. But again, No, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just saying that but had we not had that granular level of logging, based on the type of malware being used, it is the typical behavior was that it would have been the end attack after data theft. But because we were able to show and timeline everything properly using positive logging and using correlation of data, we were able to show that data theft had actually not occurred.
Any ability to estimate even what the savings to the company were? Because assume a breach disclosure would have had to have been
millions. We were talking about 350 systems hit with ransomware. We're talking about millions of dollars. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, this was a company engaged in a particular type of data that is under strict regulations. I can't really tell you more
Yeah.
than that.
Hmm.
Um, uh, so this was millions of dollars of savings.
Wow. Yeah. And turning
And
on,
the other thing,
yeah.
the other side of that is because of this heightened level of visibility that they had, we were able to make our determinations within days, instead of weeks.
Hmm.
Because we
Yeah.
knew exactly what the logs were, we knew where they were, we knew what was seen, what wasn't, we could decode everything properly, we could track all the IPs, we can touch all the systems and make sure everything was there.
Hmm. Phenomenal. And the question I was going to ask is, how much did it cost, if you will, to have all this visibility into the system, and compare and contrast that with the millions of dollars?
I would have been surprised if this solution cost more than 250,000.
More than,
More than 250,000. I would have
yeah.
been very surprised. I think it would have cost probably closer to about 100,000
Hmm.
for this solution.
Yeah.
And this is a mid-sized organization, so that they had the budget for doing this. They needed more personnel, and that was one of the recommendations. Was actually
Hmm.
that they were understaffed.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we see that so commonly as well
Very
as
common.
part of this. Yeah. And then what do you get more as the visibility goes up? I mean, we got the word complete. As we know, nothing is ever 100% complete. But I'm thinking, like, I mean, one of the things companies are now being encouraged to do is join ISHAs, information sharing
Yeah.
and analysis organizations. In the financial services and entertainment space here in LA, we've got the National Cyber Forensic Training Alliance
Hmm.
that provides that sort of increased capability. There's LA Cyber Lab, which as well
Yep.
is doing that, particularly trying to help the smaller, mid-sized and smaller organizations. Uh,
Hmm.
it would seem to me that the more visibility you have, even the greater the likelihood then that you can prevent the attack
That's
from.
exactly right. Because you can't even work towards preventing the attack if you can't detect it in the first place. And that's we could change this from visibility to detection, but detection implies that you're only looking at attacks that are coming in instead of just visibility over your data, because that's included in this. So many times we have organizations where they don't even know where all their sensitive data is in their network. So how can you have visibility if you don't even know what you're trying to keep visible?
Hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah,
so that's
yeah.
why that's why the mantra that we tell organizations all the time is, the more visible you are, the less often you probably have to call us.
Hmm. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I like most of our clients. I
Yeah.
like all of our clients.
Right.
Okay, fine, maybe most. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and I enjoy the work I do. But if you don't have to call me, then you're doing something good.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I kind of view it, we're like dentists that way. We would far
Yeah.
rather, that our clients have good dental hygiene, or in our
Yep.
case, good security hygiene, then they should
Yep.
have to call us.
Yep.
Who
Exactly.
wants to go through like an implant when a
Yeah.
little bit of, flossing and things like that would
Right.
have prevented it?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so I can talk about complete visibility now, if that works for you.
Yeah.
Um, and the idea of complete visibility, we just had this client that an employee's email was dumped because they had a password reuse between their personal email and their work email. Um, and before they even called us, they said, here's the log of the person logging in, here's the IP address, here's the date and time that it was done. And we said, great, sweep the rest of the network, see if any other email has been dumped by this IP address. And they did, and they came back a couple of days, a couple of hours later and said, oh, we need to look at these 3 users as well. And I said, great, let's look at network perimeter logs, see if they tried to do any sort of network pen test against them. And they did a sweep, and they said, oh, look, they've been trying to get in for the last 3 months. And I said, this is good. And then we checked invalid logins. We went through the motions, but working with them, we were able to answer a lot of these questions in a matter of hours, because of the amount of visibility that they had and how quickly they could detect and respond.
Hmm. Yeah. Which
And
is
so
a,
that's,
yeah, go ahead. No, which is,
no, I
yeah,
was going to say that it is very rare that an organization has this, but like you said, Stan, this takes a very strong commitment from the top to say we are going to spend the time, money, resources to get this level of visibility, so that way when an issue does happen, we can respond as fast as humanly possible.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's a segue to our next slide, the whole idea that, this concept of situational awareness, which comes out of,
Mm-hmm.
among other places, the observe, orient, decide,
Yeah.
act of that was developed during the Korean War for,
Yep.
how do jet fighters fight best. And
Yep.
it's, that observation that becomes critical here. If you can see what's going on in the sky faster than your
Yep.
enemy can, you're then in a better position to orient yourself to the battlefield, decide what to do, act, while your opponent
Yep.
is still observing, if you will. Yeah. And I think this
You
is
know,
just
it's
like totally fundamental. Yeah.
absolutely. You never want to have a situation where the malicious adversary inside your network has a better and more accurate network map than your own folks do.
Yes, that's right.
And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
amazing when that happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I
You
think
know,
one of
we
the things you said is, as we were putting these slides together, is
mhm.
talking historically about just how in the early days, the
Oh
focus
yeah.
was on keeping people out, firewalls and so on, and
Yep.
then how we get to 2019 now, and the
Sure.
world has changed.
Yeah, I mean, we're very much, if you go back to, like, even medieval history, medieval weapons were developed to counter the medieval armors of the time, and so we're in that very same situation now, where we're trying to respond to the modern weapons and the modern attacks. So, in the 90s, 2000s, there was this mentality of harden, get, the most expensive whiz bang firewall you can and prevent everyone from getting in. It was that old castle moat model, which, we all know is an awful model and doesn't work, because insider threats, because, you can't block DNS traffic, et cetera, et cetera. And so then we finally moved to this idea of, well, if you just keep the operating system patched, then you're fine. Well, what about programs that run at administrator level credentials that get popped by malicious adversaries? And then we're like, okay, well, get a firewall and patch the OS and keep your applications up to date. That very annoying pop up in the bottom right hand corner for certain products from certain companies that they say, we want you to update, and we say, no, I'm going to ignore that for now. Well, don't ignore that anymore. And that's, everybody kind of followed along. But today, the attacks are socially complex. We are using human tendencies and human psychology to take advantage of individuals. And there's no amount of technology that can stop that. That's just the honest truth. If I'm going to spend the time and money to scrape your, Stan Stahl's LinkedIn to find every password reset question answer available, then I might be able to go in and reset his email passwords, reset his bank accounts, whatever it might be.
Yep.
But I know that Stan doesn't give accurate answers to those password reset questions, and neither do I. Why on earth do you need to tell, Google where you actually were born? Why can't you just pick a fictional city?
Mm-hmm.
That's something I tell my students. It's like, what city were you born in? Gotham City. Why not?
Sure. Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
so these socially complex attacks, they are inevitable. They will get through. There's an infinite number of adversaries, and you have a finite number of resources. So if you go in with the assumption that you're not going to be able to stop every attack from starting, how do you have the visibility to see it happening?
Yeah. How do you
And
have it?
that
So
is
let's say, okay, so we think we have the visibility. We think we've
okay.
turned on our logs. We think we're getting all the information from our
And
firewalls, et cetera.
and somebody's paying attention to those logs.
And somebody's paying attention to those logs.
Whether it's AI or a person being AI, or your
Yes,
SIM, or you have a SOC that you've got people sitting there looking at lines and lines of raw logs, which is
that's right.
all loads of fun.
Oh, it's particularly, if you're having trouble falling asleep, just
Oh
stare at
goodness.
logs. That'll happen much,
Yeah.
much, much more quickly. But it
Yep.
gets to the next slide, the next thing we want to talk about, which is, okay,
Yep.
so you think you've done it. You think
Yep.
you've got it all right, and we've seen this situation where we'll talk to IT
Hmm.
people, and they're convinced that everything's ready for that event, and then we'll start
Hmm.
probing around a little bit, and guess what? It's not really
Yeah.
there. So, I mean,
Yep.
we've talked a lot about testing, testing, testing.
Yep. Well, there's definitely testing, visibility monitoring, but how do you really test that? And that's, the best recommendation I can do is engage in someone like you, someone like us, or your favorite vendor, your favorite, managed service provider, security provider, and do simulated attacks. Do a tabletop exercise where you run through a breach scenario, have a external pen test team come in and start probing around, because nowadays you want to have an external red team come in, not to test whether or not they can get in, just assume they can get in because all of them can, but it's more, once they've come in, once they write their pen test report, check your security monitoring systems to see if that's something that has been detected, should have been detected, what wasn't detected, and how do you remediate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it's simple things like that, and that's what I really recommend to organizations. Is, yeah, it's going to cost you money, but a breach response costs you a whole lot more than
Mm-hmm.
engaging in an external threat assessment test and an
Yeah.
attack and response. And this is red team, blue team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm even seeing for bigger companies, let's go do that. Let's bring in a red
Yeah,
team, let's do it a test. If you're a smaller company,
exactly.
so you can't do this, do the tabletop equivalent. Ask
Yeah,
yourself, okay, in the middle of the tabletop, all right, so how did they get in? Oh, maybe it was log me in, maybe it was remote desktop, whatever it
yep,
was. Ask
yep,
yourself then, do we have the appropriate logs
yep.
that would give us visibility if the attack came in this way? I think
Because
you
the
said that
biggest thing,
pairing, and that to me is
yeah,
like, yeah, obvious.
it seems obvious, but a lot of times, people think that malicious attackers are going to come in, drop all this, malware, all sorts of tools like that. The reality is they're living off the land. So if you have logged me in within your organization, how much visibility do you have over the actions and behaviors of individuals using it? Because I guarantee you that as soon as a malicious adversary sees you have logged me in, they're going to try to leverage it.
Hmm.
If they see that you're using a remote desktop, they will try to leverage it. TeamViewer, GoToMeeting, your VPN access, that's, a big scary thing that malicious adversaries will try to do. And, you might think, oh, I'll just turn two-factor authentication on everywhere. Well, we know that two-factor authentication is great, but it is not a cure-all.
Yeah.
And there
Well,
are
and again,
definitely, yeah,
yeah, it's the difference between turning it on, that's great, and having visibility into its use.
that's exactly right. Because if suddenly somebody's done a SIM swap attack against your head of IT and they didn't know about it, well, your visibility will hopefully give you some indication of that, because suddenly the token for the second factor auth is being sent to an IP address that is not recognized by anybody, and it's
Hmm.
overseas and things like that.
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, what you're just, I mean, SIM swap seems to me to be one of those things that one has to be very, very, very cautious of
Oh,
in
yeah.
part because it seems from what I've read, at least the news we do every week, uh, the
Mhm.
phone companies, the carriers are not doing an adequate job on
Oh, of
their
course not.
side of protecting the customer that way.
No, I mean, you and I both have mutual colleagues that are engaged in
Yes.
lawsuits
Hmm.
with cell phone companies about this very problem, because there have
Yes.
been millions of dollars of loss because of SIM swap attacks. And if your CIO has their account compromised and had a SIM swap attack against them, I mean, that's a very complex attack. That is a targeted attack, and you've
Hmm.
got to have really good visibility to be able to see that occurring and to be able to detect that even happened in the first place
Yeah.
after the breach has already happened.
That's right. That's right. And just even awareness that if, yes, things don't seem right with your smartphone, there might
Yeah,
be a reason for that. See
that's
something,
exactly
say
right.
something. kind of
Yep.
that perspective,
Exactly.
as well. So when I look at this stuff, I'm always sensitive to the distinction between what the IT team can do. They look,
Yep.
from IT, let's look down, but then you've got the whole incident response team that not only has to know what's going on looking down, but has to also be able to, okay, now what do we do about it at a corporate level? And this slide, I think, kind of speaks to that.
Well, I mean, I think, this is a whole separate other webinar, but if you don't have somebody from the legal counsel leading everything from an incident response team, in my opinion, you're doing things in the wrong order. It's having a really good legal counsel being able to even emphasize that heightened visibility again and again and again, because they can't make the recommendations for your organization based on their expertise, based on what occurred, if that visibility is not there in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, the InfoSec manager, senior level executives, things like that, it's very rare, very, very rare that we have an organization that says, I'd rather not know a piece of information than know it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things we're seeing more and more on the, with Citadel, is that need to work collaboratively with legal counsel, so that just in the broad case, not just the incident response case, but in the broad case, is the client, is the client's information security management, top to bottom, defendable? If something happens and we got to go to court, can we collectively defend the client in this case?
That's exactly right. And that's why, even on this traditional incident response model that people used to use, it used to be a shift from forensics to IR, and that, we used to say that IR was, not really legally defensible. You didn't have to worry about that because adversaries are overseas. But that shift has gone back to the legally defensible, because you're worried about government regulation, you're worried about response and breach notification, all that stuff. So now it actually does need to be legally defensible. And having great legal counsel, whether it's in-house or external, becomes so critical, because then, and you don't want to talk to them just when the breach has occurred and you need to test your visibility because, things have already happened. You want to work with them beforehand, and they'll tell you this, good legal counsel that has been in the trenches on these breaches will tell you the same thing. The more visibility you have, the more information you can gather from every aspect of what has occurred, the better off you're going to be, because the better the decision making can be.
Yeah. And that's a shout out, if you will, for SecureTheVillage and the Leadership Council, because that we have worked so diligently. How do we bring the community together so that, the Joe Greenfields on the incident response forensic side are talking to and take a look at our, the SecureTheVillage web page, the lawyers, the attorneys on our Leadership Council, and all the other players as well, so that collectively we are much more stronger than we are individually.
The reality is, when an incident occurred, IT, the common perception we have from IT is we want, the forensics and the IR people to get out of here as quickly as possible, so that way we can remediate and get up and running as quickly as possible. And that's what we want to do too. We want to get the information we need and be able to do our jobs, be able to investigate, help you guys out, and move on. If you don't have that level of visibility, but either you don't think you do or you do think you do, as soon as we start looking at things, we're going to tell you, don't remediate, don't touch, because we need to make sure that this information is here for us and legal counsel to make the decisions. And yes, there are some practices that try to remediate as they investigate, and that always becomes dangerous, in my opinion. But that's my professional opinion from doing this for a little while.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, that becomes a segue into kind of, okay, so if you're on this show, you're watching it live, or if you happen to be watching this a month or 2 months or 3 months later from our website, whenever you do it, the information security manager, the leadership team, needs to take on as an assignment, conduct a test. Assume it's ransomware, just pick one. If you don't want ransomware, do business email compromise. If you've got a lot of intellectual property you're concerned about, run a test on intellectual property. Whatever it is, conduct it. Look for the holes in your visibility and ask yourself the question, how much better could we be if we had visibility into X, whatever it was? Get up that visibility, update your plan, rinse and repeat is the mantra.
Yeah, I mean, and you can do it internally with your own IT team. You can have an external, an external team come in and help you with this. But testing your IR plans, testing your disaster recovery plans, it's the same thing. You go just like I tell my students, always try to have something in the physical world that is representative of what you would do in the cyber world. So how do you know if the building's on fire, if you don't run fire drills, you won't know where the exits are, and you won't know how to get out and stay, and be safe. Same thing with an IR plan. If you don't test it, and as something simple as deploying ransomware, that's, imagine this system gets hit with ransomware. What, just like you said, Stan, what would I see? What would I not see? Things like that. And you can, there's a lot of companies here in LA and across the country that can help you do that, saying, yeah, give us a target. We will simulate a ransomware attack. We'll work with your IT team. We'll work with your blue team to say, you should be finding this, and this markers. If you're not, let's tweak the systems to find that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think,
better safe than sorry, I think somebody once said.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's a new trend that's going on, that they're calling it purple teams, hybrid red and blue. So that way you learn from each other as you go through, and you identify things, not just after the red team has done their thing and said, yeah, you've been popped, here you go, here's how I did it. It's more of like an interactive thing between the red and the blue team.
Yeah, all very good. Well, we're running up to the top of the hour, so let me just kind of summarize things. We do on our resource kit, we've got a whole section on getting cyber prepared. The earlier webinar from last November is up there. By the next couple of days, this one will be up as well. It'll be part of that, and you may be watching it, since if you're not live, you may be watching it from that page itself. So do know about that. We're still talking about what we're going to have as our next webinar, what the subject's going to be, but it will be November 7th. So plan for that, sign up for it on our Secure the Village website. And this is just part of the whole series of webinars that we've designed these to provide information security management guidance, that they be practical, real world, how to, they be actionable. We just gave you an assignment. Please, before the next meeting, the next webinar, do that. Get your team together, run a test. And these are always the first Thursday of the month, 10 a.m. Pacific. These webinars are just part of what we do. We have executive focus groups to help generate that tone at the top, if you will. We've got our information security management and leadership resource kit that's available, code of basic IT practices at minimum reasonable security practices, both connected into the CIS 20, both in the process of being updated. I hope in the next couple of months we'll update to the new version of the Center for Internet Security Controls, and then community-based programs as well. Ultimately, we have got to reach every consumer, every family, every mother, every father, every aunt, every uncle, every son, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's just part of what Secure the Village is all about. One more shout out for Secure the Village, Pepperdine Cybersecure SoCal 2019, and you can register for that at securethevillage.org. Get a list of all of our speakers and what the programs are like. Please join us at that, October 17th, 2019. For more information, here's your information, jgreenfield at Maryman.com, your phone number, my phone number, my Secure the Village address, and you can follow me on Twitter as well at Stan Stahl, and join us on LinkedIn as well. Citadel, our company, publishes a weekly cybersecurity news of the week and weekend vulnerability and patch report. That's free. You can sign up for that at citadel-information.com. securethevillage.com. And please, 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 please get involved. Follow us on LinkedIn, attend an event, join our leadership council. We need to create momentum. We need to mobilize the people. Need to get everybody involved. And that's, as much as anything, a problem of mass. How do we get more people to get more people to get more people to trade more people, and so on. It's that virtuous spiral, if you will. And of course, if you want to sponsor us, we'd be delighted. Send us an email to info@securethevillage.org. Visit us on our website. Either way, Joe, any final words?
Surely from a business perspective, we're here to help. If you feel like you want to test the visibility of your network, if you want to get some further information, you can email, call us. Otherwise, talk to your IT vendors, talk to your external IT vendors, talk to everybody, and just ask the basic question: how visible are we? If we're under attack, if something has happened, how can we see what has happened? Do we have everything in place?
That's right.
And Stan, thank you so much for inviting me on. I appreciate it, and I love spreading the word on this.
You're great at spreading the word. I'm grateful to you. And what you said is absolutely right. Visibility, visibility, visibility. That's the key. Both helping on the prevention side, prevent, detect, and also when you have to call in the experts, the forensics, the investigators.
Exactly. The more visibility you have, the more visibility you have, the faster we can do our jobs, the faster you can go back to doing what your organization does best.
Yeah, and the less it costs you. Yeah.
And the less it costs.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Great. Joe, thank you very, very much. It's been a great webinar. I appreciate it. And with that, we are adjourned.
Fantastic.